The GLC Coupe, as Mercedes calls it, defies logic. It is, in fact, a variant of the GLC class SUV, which has been around in US dealerships since the 2016 model year. But then Mercedes went and hatched this coupe version one model year later as a sort of fastback roofline alternative to its more upright sibling. Of course, that doesn't make it a coupe, at least in the general automotive sense. Now, I'm no mathematician, but I'm counting 4 doors here. That said, purists would then have to object to a whole mess of luxury brands with current or upcoming SUVs marketed at least to some extent under the coupe designation. You're watching this video though, so I'm gonna bet that you're actually kind of interested in this thing. Let's get into it. The GLC got a raft of updates for 2020 as part of the mid-cycle changes Mercedes made to the SUV, hot on the heels of similar updates to the related C-Class for 2019. Changes to the GLC include reshaped headlights and bumper openings, with a lower framework that spans the entire width for a similar look on the GLC 43, GLC 63, and even an AMG line for the GLC 300. Speaking of which, the GLC comes in more variants than you can shake a stick at. There's the GLC SUV and the GLC Coupe, with 5 distinct drivetrains between the two for the 2020 model year, including 3 AMG models and a plug-in hybrid. We have with us here the Mercedes AMG GLC 43 Coupe. That's smack dab in the middle of the drivetrain ladder, though it might be hard to find anything that's not a plain old GLC 300 SUV, which accounts for about 3/4 of new dealer inventory on Cars.com as of this video. The good news? We've tested the 300, the 43, and the 63, so we'll give you some context around all 3. From the bottom to the top of the drivetrain range, power roughly doubles. Both the GLC 300 and GLC 43 employ a 9-speed automatic transmission with faster shifting on the 43. Now, both SUVs move well enough around town thanks to short gearing and quick, assertive revs, but we've observed some accelerator lag with both drivetrains. It's inconsistent, sometimes hardly noticeable, other times resulting in a full second or more of lag when you hit the gas. Now, much of that seems to depend on the transmission's current gear, so at least some of the blame belongs with the 9-speed. It especially comes into play when you need more power while you're already in motion, passing slower traffic on the highway, for example. The 9-speed can downshift multiple gears in one fell swoop, but it can also be a bit stubborn to dole them out, particularly in the GLC 300, unless you give the pedal a good prod. The GLC 43 has enough low-end torque at least to tack on speed even while it's sitting in a higher gear, so this seems like less of a liability there. The GLC 63, meanwhile, has a hand-built 4-liter turbocharged V8 with a 9-speed automatic transmission that replaces the torque converter with a wet start-off clutch. Mercedes claims it eclipses 60 miles per hour in under 4 seconds, which is more power than anyone ever needed in a compact SUV, but you know, what the hey. It's absolutely ridiculous for this class. And by ridiculous, we mean ridiculously fun. Now, the GLC has a multitude of suspension and all-wheel drive offerings across the range, with progressively more power going to the rear wheels as you climb up the AMG ladder, and more sophisticated suspension components as well. Adaptive shock absorbers are standard on all GLC models for 2020, and they work with coil springs on non-AMG models or air springs on the AMGs, with unique hardware and tuning relative to each AMG. The effect makes for better chassis rigidity in this GLC 43 versus the last GLC 300 we drove, which exhibited a lot of body motion and general flexing over uneven pavement. You pay for it though in terms of notably firmer shock absorption from the AMG tuned suspension, even when it's dialed over to its maximum comfort settings, so decide what's important for you. The steering in our GLC 43 requires low to medium effort around parking lots, but it has a quick enough ratio, particularly as you get into a sweeping curve, to make for assertive directional changes and easy fine-tuning of exactly where the nose is pointed. There's minimum body roll, and our test car's Continental summer tires deliver good lateral grip. The brakes have a somewhat binary pedal feel, which makes it tricky to modulate smooth stops, but they improve on the GLC 300's softer pedal action. The biggest change inside across all GLC models involves the dashboard display, which is now a standard 10¼ inches versus the outgoing GLC's 7 or 8.4-inch display. It's also now a touchscreen, though you can also operate it with a touchpad at armrest level. That's a big step in the right direction. Before, it was a non-touch display that required using a knob controller with or without a touchpad, depending which multimedia system you got. That's a step in the right direction, but it's far from perfect. For one, the standard Apple CarPlay and Android Auto are tethered connections instead of the wireless integration that's fast proliferating industry-wide. In our experience, CarPlay also pops up only on about 2/3 of the widescreen display, so it doesn't leverage all the available real estate. Now, that might change with future updates from your smartphone's operating system or from Mercedes, as we've seen happen from at least one other automaker. What won't change though is the touchpad-only setup, which requires you to swipe left or right instead of turning the old knob, something some folks may have preferred. Also a drag are the new capacitive touch directional controllers on the GLC's steering wheel, which Mercedes redesigned for 2020. A number of other Mercedes models use them these days, but they remain less intuitive than physical buttons. Cabin materials are exemplary up front, even for a compact luxury SUV, with uniform low-gloss padded materials almost everywhere you look. The wide center console makes for a bit of a narrow berth in terms of knee clearance, and despite all the width it takes up, there's very little open storage space therein. That's an area the GLC's competitors, not to mention most non-luxury compact SUVs, have this Benz beat. The back seat affords moderate legroom, but a nice high seating position. You can see some cost cutting in terms of materials back here, with harder, shinier plastics peeking out around arm level and below. Predictably, headroom is tighter in the GLC Coupe, and adult passengers will probably emerge with a bad case of hat hair. That pales in comparison to the Coupe's main drawback, which is visibility. Sightlines in the GLC SUV are actually fine, but the GLC Coupe's diving roofline makes for smaller backseat windows and a tiny rear window. Adding insult to injury is the fact that a rear window wiper, a staple on most SUVs and a standard feature on the GLC SUV, isn't offered on the GLC Coupe, so the view out back gets even worse in the rain. Now, the shape of the GLC suggests that cargo volume also takes a bath, but the good news here is that the trade-off isn't as bad as it might seem. We actually measured a few inches more cargo depth in the GLC Coupe than the GLC SUV, though you lose a lot of the cargo height as you move toward the liftgate, which has a more dramatic rake than on the GLC SUV. Still, Mercedes quotes about 10% less cargo volume behind the rear seats in the GLC Coupe versus the SUV, which isn't all that much in the scheme of things. Both have enormous compartments under the load floor too. In our testing, we observed roughly 4 cubic feet of additional storage space down there in our GLC Coupe, though it bears noting that our test car does not have Mercedes' optional spare tire, which could diminish the space. All that aside, there's no dismissing another hard truth about the GLC Coupe. It's expensive. Now, the Coupes get a standard sunroof. That's an extra cost option in the SUVs, and a few other minor things, but their sum total makes the price premium a hard case to make. It's kind of the backdrop for so many coupe-like SUVs. You pay more, and it's largely just for styling. Shoppers have shown limited interest in doing just that. BMW shoppers prefer the X3 to the X4 by more than 6-1 these days, and as of this filming, the GLC Coupe accounts for just 5% of all GLC class examples in Cars.com new car inventory. Of course, the costs to develop these coupe-like SUVs is typically lower because they mostly share parts with other more popular models, but the demand for them is clearly minimal, and it's not hard to see why. In that vein, the GLC SUV has some strengths, and this mid-cycle refresh offers some common-sense improvements. But updates notwithstanding, the GLC Coupe still trades notable practicalities for swoopier styling that kind of just suggests a jacked-up fastback. Hey, maybe that's your thing. You did watch to the end of this video after all. But I'm guessing more of you will resolve to shop the GLC SUV instead. And honestly, I can't blame you.